Jean-Jacques Rousseau, one of the most influential philosophers of the Enlightenment, was born on June 28, 1712, in Geneva, Switzerland. His early life was marked by loss and upheaval, experiences that would later inform his views on human nature, society, and the individual's relationship with the world. Rousseau's family background was modest, but his upbringing in Geneva, a city-state known for its republican ideals, left an indelible mark on his philosophical outlook. Rousseau's mother, Suzanne Bernard, died just 9 days after his birth due to complications from childbirth. This tragic loss left Rousseau with an emotional void that he would later explore in his writings, particularly in his autobiographical work, The Confessions. His father, Isaac Rousseau, a watchmaker by trade, played a significant role in his early education but was also a source of instability. Isaac's penchant for storytelling and love of literature deeply influenced young Jean-Jacques, fostering a vivid imagination and a lifelong passion for reading. The Rousseau household was far from conventional. After his wife's death, Isaac struggled to provide a stable home for his son. The family lived modestly, and financial difficulties were a constant challenge. Despite this, Rousseau's father instilled in him a love for books, particularly works of classical antiquity and the tales of Plutarch, which introduced him to themes of heroism, virtue, and civic responsibility. These early readings would later resonate in Rousseau's philosophical writings. When Rousseau was 10 years old, his father was forced to flee Geneva after a legal dispute, leaving the boy in the care of his uncle. This event marked the beginning of a life filled with displacement and uncertainty. Rousseau was sent to live with a pastor in a small village near Geneva, where he received a rudimentary education. While his formal schooling was limited, his exposure to rural life left a profound impression on him. He developed a deep appreciation for nature, which would later become a central theme in his philosophy. The absence of a stable family life led Rousseau to seek solace in introspection and creativity. He often felt out of place among his peers, which contributed to his growing sense of individuality. This sense of alienation and the search for belonging would later surface in his critiques of modern society and his calls for a return to a more natural state of existence. By his early teens, Rousseau had begun to display a rebellious streak. Dissatisfied with the rigid structures of his environment, he left Geneva at the age of 16 to embark on a life of wandering. This decision marked the start of a journey that would take him across Europe and expose him to a variety of cultures, ideas, and experiences. These formative years on the road provided him with a unique perspective on human behavior and societal structures. Despite his difficult upbringing, Rousseau's early years in Geneva instilled in him a respect for the principles of equality and civic duty. The city's republican traditions, combined with his exposure to classical texts, laid the groundwork for his later philosophical explorations. Geneva's culture of debate and intellectual curiosity fostered an environment in which Rousseau's ideas could eventually take root. Rousseau's relationship with his father, though fraught with challenges, was a defining aspect of his early life. Isaac's departure from Geneva left a lasting impact on Jean-Jacques, shaping his views on paternal responsibility and the importance of nurturing relationships. These themes would later emerge in his writings on education and social bonds. As Rousseau matured, he began to question the societal norms and values he had encountered in his youth. The disparity between his idealized notions of virtue and the realities of human behavior fueled his skepticism toward established institutions. These early experiences planted the seeds of his later critique of inequality and his vision of a more just and harmonious society. In sum, Rousseau's early years were marked by loss, instability, and a restless search for identity. These experiences, while challenging, were instrumental in shaping his unique perspective on life and society. From his modest beginnings in Geneva to the formative years of wandering that followed, Rousseau's early life laid the foundation for the revolutionary ideas that would make him one of history's most influential thinkers. At the age of 16, Jean-Jacques Rousseau left Geneva and embarked on a journey that would shape his character and worldview in profound ways. This period of wandering was marked by a series of encounters, hardships, and self-discoveries that provided the raw material for much of his later philosophical work. Rousseau's travels exposed him to diverse cultures, people, and ideas, broadening his perspective and deepening his understanding of the complexities of human life. Rousseau's decision to leave Geneva was driven by a combination of youthful defiance and a yearning for freedom. His dissatisfaction with the rigid expectations of society and his sense of alienation from his peers led him to seek new experiences beyond the confines of his hometown. This restless spirit would become a defining characteristic of Rousseau's life, manifesting in his constant questioning of societal norms and his pursuit of authenticity. One of the most pivotal moments in this period was Rousseau's encounter with Françoise-Louise de Warens, a Catholic noblewoman who became both a mentor and a surrogate mother figure. Their relationship, though unconventional, was instrumental in shaping Rousseau's intellectual and spiritual development. De Warens introduced him to Catholicism, prompting his conversion from Protestantism, a decision that alienated him from his native Geneva but opened the door to new opportunities and perspectives. Under de Warens' patronage, Rousseau was exposed to a wealth of literature, philosophy, and music. These formative years were characterized by a dual pursuit of knowledge and self-discovery. While he studied various subjects, including science and theology, Rousseau also began to explore his own talents, particularly in music. This period of intellectual and artistic growth laid the foundation for his later works and ideas. Despite the guidance and support he received, Rousseau's life during this time was far from stable. He often struggled with financial insecurity and lacked a clear direction. His travels across Switzerland, France, and Italy were marked by periods of hardship, including stints as a tutor, servant, and secretary. These experiences, while difficult, provided Rousseau with a first-hand understanding of social inequality and the struggles of ordinary people. Rousseau's exposure to different social strata and cultural practices during his travels broadened his perspective on human nature and society. His observations of rural communities, in particular, reinforced his belief in the inherent goodness of humanity and the corrupting influence of civilization. These ideas would later crystallize in his critique of modern society and his advocacy for a return to a more natural way of living. This period of wandering was also marked by moments of deep introspection. Rousseau often reflected on his place in the world and the meaning of existence, grappling with questions of identity and purpose. His experiences of solitude during his travels fostered a sense of self-reliance and a profound connection to nature, themes that would become central to his philosophy. While Rousseau's travels exposed him to new ideas, they also highlighted the limitations of the societies he encountered. He observed the disparities between the ideals professed by institutions and the realities of human behavior, fueling his skepticism toward established authority. These contradictions would later inform his critiques of organized religion, government, and social hierarchies. By the time Rousseau reached his mid-20s, he had begun to develop a unique intellectual voice. His experiences as a wanderer, marked by a mix of hardship, exploration, and self-discovery, shaped his evolving worldview and provided the foundation for his later philosophical inquiries. The lessons he learned during this time about freedom, inequality, and human nature would resonate throughout his writings. In conclusion, Rousseau's years of wandering were transformative, both personally and intellectually. They exposed him to the diversity of human experience and the complexities of societal structures, while also fostering a deep sense of individuality and introspection. This period of his life, though challenging, was essential in shaping the ideas that would later define his legacy as one of the Enlightenment's most influential thinkers. As Jean-Jacques Rousseau matured, his intellectual curiosity drew him into the vibrant world of Enlightenment thought, a movement that sought to challenge traditional authority and promote reason, science, and individual liberty. The mid-18th century was a period of profound intellectual ferment, and Rousseau found himself surrounded by some of the most brilliant minds of the era. His interactions with these thinkers and his exposure to their ideas would prove both inspirational and contentious, setting the stage for his unique philosophical contributions. Rousseau arrived in Paris in 1742, a city that was the epicenter of Enlightenment activity. The salons of Paris, where philosophers, writers and scientists gathered to exchange ideas, offered Rousseau a platform to engage with prominent intellectuals. Among them were Denis Diderot, the editor of the Encyclopedia, and Voltaire, whose wit and advocacy for civil liberties made him a leading figure of the Enlightenment. These connections allowed Rousseau to immerse himself in contemporary debates and gain recognition as an emerging thinker. Despite his initial admiration for the Enlightenment, Rousseau's views began to diverge from those of his contemporaries. While many Enlightenment thinkers championed progress through science, technology, and rationality, Rousseau grew increasingly skeptical of these ideals. He questioned whether the advancements of modern society truly led to human flourishing or whether they instead alienated individuals from their natural state of being. This skepticism would later form the basis of his critique of civilization in his discourses. One of Rousseau's earliest intellectual contributions came in the form of music theory. His essay on musical notation, presented to the Academy of Sciences in 1742, demonstrated his innovative thinking, even though it did not win the Academy's approval. Music remained a lifelong passion for Rousseau, and he believed it to be a powerful expression of human emotion. His operatic compositions and writings on music revealed his belief in the importance of simplicity and emotional authenticity, themes that mirrored his broader philosophical concerns. Rousseau's friendship with Denis Diderot proved particularly significant during this period. Diderot enlisted Rousseau to contribute to the Encyclopedia, a monumental project aimed at compiling and disseminating human knowledge. Rousseau wrote several entries on topics such as music and political economy, showcasing his versatility as a thinker. However, his growing ideological differences with Diderot and other contributors eventually led to tensions that would fracture these relationships. Rousseau's participation in a 1750 essay contest organized by the Academy of Dijon marked a turning point in his intellectual journey. The prompt asked whether the restoration of the sciences and arts had contributed to the purification of morals. In his response, titled Discourse on the Sciences and Arts, Rousseau argued that rather than improving society, the progress of science and the arts had corrupted human virtues. This provocative stance earned him both acclaim and criticism, establishing him as a distinct and controversial voice in Enlightenment discourse. The success of the discourse brought Rousseau widespread attention and solidified his position as a critic of modernity. Unlike many of his contemporaries, who viewed progress as an unqualified good, Rousseau emphasized the moral and social costs of technological and cultural advancements. He lamented the loss of community, authenticity, and connection to nature, which he believed were essential to human happiness. This critique resonated with those who felt disillusioned by the rapid changes of the age. Rousseau's ideas were not without their detractors. His rejection of scientific and artistic progress as a path to moral improvement put him at odds with prominent Enlightenment figures, including Voltaire, who ridiculed Rousseau's romanticization of the state of nature. These ideological clashes highlighted the growing divide between Rousseau and the broader Enlightenment movement, a divide that would deepen as his philosophy evolved. Despite these differences, Rousseau's early engagement with Enlightenment thought provided him with a foundation upon which to build his distinctive ideas. His exposure to the intellectual debates of the time sharpened his critiques of inequality, societal corruption, and the loss of personal freedom. Moreover, his interactions with leading thinkers helped him refine his philosophical voice and articulate a vision that sought to reconcile human freedom with social cohesion. In conclusion, Rousseau's introduction to Enlightenment thought was a period of both inspiration and divergence. While he benefited from the intellectual energy of the age, his critical stance toward many of its core values set him apart from his contemporaries. This chapter in his life was marked by the formation of the ideas that would later define his legacy as a philosopher who challenged the foundations of modern society. Jean-Jacques Rousseau's emergence as a groundbreaking philosopher was cemented by two of his most influential early works: the Discourse on the Sciences and Arts, 1750, and the Discourse on the Origin and Basis of Inequality Among Men, 1755. In these essays, Rousseau introduced ideas that challenged the prevailing optimism of the Enlightenment, questioning whether human progress and civilization had truly led to moral or social improvement. These discourses established his reputation as a bold and controversial thinker, one willing to confront the assumptions of his age. Rousseau's discourse on the sciences and arts was written in response to a contest posed by the Academy of Dijon, which asked whether the advancement of the arts and sciences had improved morality. Rousseau's answer was a resounding no. He argued that the development of knowledge and culture had not elevated humanity's moral character, but had instead fostered vanity, inequality, and corruption. Civilization, in Rousseau's view, masked the vices of individuals under a thin veneer of refinement, creating a society that valued appearance over substance. This first discourse was revolutionary for its time. The Enlightenment was largely characterized by a belief in the transformative power of reason, science, and culture to improve human life. Rousseau's assertion that progress had degraded, rather than enhanced, human virtue was a direct challenge to the prevailing optimism of his contemporaries. His arguments resonated with those who felt disillusioned by the superficiality of urban life and the widening gap between the privileged elite and the rest of society. Rousseau's critique became even more pointed in his discourse on the origin and basis of inequality among men. Written as another submission to the Academy of Dijon, this essay delved into the origins and consequences of social inequality. Rousseau distinguished between two types of inequality: natural inequality, stemming from differences in physical strength or intelligence, and moral or political inequality, which arose from societal conventions and institutions. It was the latter form of inequality that Rousseau viewed as unjust and corrosive. To explain the origins of inequality, Rousseau posited a hypothetical state of nature, a condition in which humans existed before the advent of organized society. In this primal state, Rousseau argued humans were free, self-sufficient, and relatively equal. They lived in harmony with nature and experienced few desires beyond their immediate needs. However, as humans began to form communities, develop agriculture, and accumulate property, competition and jealousy emerged, leading to the establishment of social hierarchies and institutionalized inequality. Rousseau's depiction of the state of nature was not intended as a historical account, but as a philosophical thought experiment. By contrasting the simplicity and equality of this imagined past with the complexities and injustices of modern society, Rousseau highlighted the ways in which social institutions had corrupted human relationships. Property, in particular, was a central focus of his critique. Rousseau famously declared, "The first man who, having enclosed a piece of ground, bethought himself of saying, 'This is mine,' and found people simple enough to believe him, was the true founder of civil society." In the Discourse on Inequality, Rousseau painted a bleak picture of modern civilization, which he argued perpetuated inequality and enslaved individuals to artificial desires and oppressive institutions. He contended that the pursuit of wealth and status had replaced genuine human connections with selfishness and competition. These ideas resonated deeply with his readers, many of whom were beginning to question the social and economic disparities of the 18th century. Rousseau's critiques of inequality and private property positioned him as a forerunner of later revolutionary thought. His writings inspired debates about the nature of justice, the origins of inequality, and the legitimacy of political authority. While Rousseau did not advocate for the abolition of property or a return to the state of nature, his work laid the groundwork for discussions about social reform and the rights of individuals. The discourses also revealed Rousseau's talent for eloquence and rhetorical power. His ability to blend philosophical reasoning with passionate appeals to emotion made his arguments both compelling and accessible to a broad audience. His critiques of civilization struck a chord with those who felt alienated by the rapid changes of the Enlightenment era, from urbanization to the rise of industrial capitalism. However, Rousseau's ideas were not without controversy. Many Enlightenment thinkers, including Voltaire, dismissed his romanticized view of the state of nature as unrealistic and his critique of progress as overly pessimistic. Despite these criticisms, Rousseau's discourses challenged the intellectual status quo and paved the way for more radical discussions about the relationship between the individual and society. In conclusion, Rousseau's discourse on the sciences and arts and discourse on inequality marked a turning point in his career and an Enlightenment thought. By questioning the moral and social consequences of human progress, Rousseau offered a critique that was as unsettling as it was thought-provoking. These works not only solidified his reputation as a philosopher, but also laid the foundation for his later contributions to political and social theory, ensuring his enduring influence on Western thought. Jean-Jacques Rousseau's 1762 work, The Social Contract, represents one of the most influential texts in political philosophy. In this seminal treatise, Rousseau addressed fundamental questions about the legitimacy of political authority, the nature of freedom, and the relationship between individuals and the collective. His ideas not only challenged existing power structures, but also laid the intellectual groundwork for modern democratic thought. Rousseau began The Social Contract with a declaration that remains one of the most famous lines in political philosophy: "Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains." This statement encapsulates his central concern: the tension between the natural freedom of individuals and the constraints imposed by society. While he acknowledged the necessity of governance, Rousseau argued that any form of authority must be based on the collective will of the people rather than on coercion or inherited power. At the heart of Rousseau's argument is the concept of the general will. According to Rousseau, the general will represents the collective interest of the people, transcending individual desires and aiming for the common good. Unlike the will of all, which aggregates individual preferences, the general will reflects what is best for society as a whole. For Rousseau, a legitimate political system is one in which laws are expressions of the general will and citizens participate directly in their formulation. Rousseau's vision of political legitimacy also rested on the idea of a social contract. He proposed that individuals, in order to escape the chaos of the state of nature, voluntarily enter into an agreement to form a political community. Through this contract, they collectively create laws and institutions while relinquishing certain freedoms to ensure the protection of their rights and the promotion of the common good. However, this surrender of individual autonomy is not a loss. Rather, it allows individuals to achieve a higher form of freedom, what Rousseau called moral freedom, by living under laws they have helped create. One of Rousseau's most provocative claims was that true freedom is possible only in a direct democracy, where citizens actively participate in lawmaking. He rejected the idea of representative government, arguing that it alienates individuals from their sovereignty. For Rousseau, sovereignty could not be delegated or divided. It resided entirely with the people. This radical vision contrasted sharply with the monarchical and oligarchic systems of his time, making The Social Contract a revolutionary text. Another key aspect of Rousseau's philosophy is his emphasis on equality. He argued that social and economic inequalities must be minimized to ensure the legitimacy of the social contract. While Rousseau did not advocate for absolute economic equality, he believed that excessive disparities in wealth undermined social cohesion and corrupted the political system. His critique of inequality resonated with those who saw the growing gap between the privileged elite and the masses as a moral and political crisis. Rousseau's ideas about education and civic responsibility were also integral to his vision of a just society. He emphasized the importance of fostering civic virtue and educating citizens to understand and pursue the common good. For Rousseau, participation in public life was not merely a right but a duty, essential for maintaining a healthy and equitable political community. This emphasis on active citizenship has had a lasting impact on democratic theory. Despite its innovative ideas, the social contract faced significant backlash. Its challenges to monarchy, religion, and entrenched power structures made it controversial, and it was banned in several countries, including Rousseau's native Geneva. The book's assertion that citizens could be forced to be free in order to uphold the general will was particularly contentious, leading critics to accuse Rousseau of endorsing authoritarianism. Nevertheless, Rousseau insisted that his ideas were aimed at fostering true liberty and justice. The influence of the social contract on subsequent political movements and ideologies cannot be overstated. Its call for popular sovereignty and equality inspired revolutionary thinkers and activists, particularly during the French Revolution. Figures like Maximilien Robespierre drew on Rousseau's ideas to justify radical changes to the political order, though the outcomes of these revolutions often diverged from Rousseau's ideals. His work also influenced later philosophers, including Immanuel Kant and Karl Marx, who grappled with the questions of freedom, equality, and authority raised in Rousseau's writings. In conclusion, The Social Contract was a groundbreaking exploration of the principles that underpin legitimate political authority and the nature of freedom within society. Rousseau's vision of a political community founded on the general will, direct democracy, and civic responsibility challenged the conventions of his time and offered a blueprint for a more just and equitable society. While his ideas remain the subject of debate, their impact on political philosophy and democratic thought is undeniable, cementing Rousseau's legacy as one of the Enlightenment's most profound and revolutionary thinkers. In 1762, the same year Jean-Jacques Rousseau published The Social Contract, he also released another groundbreaking work, Émile, or On Education. This philosophical treatise on education explored the development of individuals from childhood to adulthood and proposed a revolutionary approach to learning that emphasized personal freedom, natural development, and moral education. Émile is not only one of Rousseau's most influential works, but also a foundational text in modern educational theory. Rousseau begins Émile by rejecting the traditional education systems of his time, which he viewed as oppressive and artificial. In his view, conventional schooling stifled curiosity, imposed rigid structures, and focused excessively on rote learning and discipline. Rousseau believed that these methods disconnected children from their natural instincts and turned them into mere instruments of societal conformity. Instead, he proposed an educational model rooted in the natural development of the individual, one that sought to cultivate both the mind and the heart. The central idea of Émile is that education should follow the natural progression of human development. Rousseau divides childhood into distinct stages, each requiring different approaches to teaching and guidance. In the early years, Rousseau emphasizes the importance of physical freedom and sensory exploration, allowing children to learn through direct experience. He insists that children should be shielded from the corrupting influences of society, as they are naturally innocent and curious. For Rousseau, the role of the educator is not to impose knowledge, but to facilitate a child's natural growth. A key aspect of Rousseau's educational philosophy is the concept of learning through experience. He argues that children should not be taught abstract principles or moral rules, but should instead discover these truths through practical, hands-on activities. For example, rather than lecturing a child on the value of hard work, Rousseau suggests creating situations in which the child can experience the consequences of effort and persistence firsthand. This method aligns with his belief in the importance of autonomy and self-discovery. Moral education plays a central role in Émile, particularly in the later stages of development. Rousseau believes that true education involves not only intellectual growth, but also the cultivation of virtue and empathy. As the fictional pupil Émile grows older, he is gradually introduced to the concept of the general will and the responsibilities of citizenship. Rousseau envisions education as a holistic process that prepares individuals not only for personal fulfillment, but also for active participation in the community. Rousseau's treatment of gender in Émile has sparked significant debate, both during his time and in contemporary scholarship. While he advocates for the free and natural development of boys, he takes a more prescriptive and limiting view of girls' education. In the section on Sophie, Émile's intended partner, Rousseau argues that women's education should be oriented toward pleasing and supporting men, reflecting the patriarchal norms of his era. This contradiction in Rousseau's philosophy has been criticized for undermining his broader ideals of freedom and equality. The publication of Émile was met with immediate controversy. Its unconventional ideas about religion, morality, and education drew the ire of both religious and political authorities. The book's discussion of faith, particularly in the section titled The Profession of Faith of the Savoyard Vicar, was seen as a challenge to Orthodox Christianity. In this passage, Rousseau advocates for a deistic faith based on reason and personal conscience rather than dogma, and institutional authority. As a result, Émile was banned in France and condemned by the Catholic Church, forcing Rousseau to flee to avoid persecution. Despite the initial backlash, Émile has had a profound and lasting impact on education. Rousseau's emphasis on child-centered learning and the importance of personal freedom influenced the development of progressive education movements in the 19th and 20th centuries. Thinkers such as Johann Heinrich Pestalozzi, Friedrich Froebel, and Maria Montessori drew on Rousseau's ideas to create educational systems that prioritize the needs and interests of the child. Émile also resonates with broader themes in Rousseau's philosophy, particularly his critique of civilization and his belief in the natural goodness of humanity. Just as he argued in The Social Contract that society corrupts individuals, Rousseau contends in Émile that traditional education suppresses the innate potential of the child. By aligning education with nature and personal freedom, Rousseau seeks to restore the harmony between the individual and the world. In conclusion, Émile represents Rousseau's vision of education as a transformative and liberating process. By advocating for natural development, experiential learning, and moral growth, Rousseau challenged the conventions of his time and offered a radical alternative to traditional schooling. While some aspects of his philosophy, particularly his views on gender, remain contentious, Émile continues to inspire educators and philosophers, affirming Rousseau's enduring influence on the field of education and human development. The publication of The Social Contract and Émile in 1762 marked a turning point in Jean-Jacques Rousseau's life, not only solidifying his reputation as a revolutionary thinker, but also exposing him to widespread controversy and persecution. The radical ideas expressed in these works, his critiques of political authority, organized religion, and traditional education, provoked powerful opposition from both religious and political authorities. The fallout from these publications forced Rousseau into a life of exile, during which he experienced profound personal and intellectual challenges. The immediate reaction to Émile was particularly intense. Religious authorities condemned the book for its unconventional views on faith, particularly as expressed in the section, The Profession of Faith of the Savoyard Vicar. In this passage, Rousseau advocated for a deistic belief system that rejected the rituals, dogmas, and hierarchies of institutional religion. His call for a personal, rational approach to spirituality was perceived as a direct attack on Catholicism and other established religious traditions. As a result, Émile was banned in France and burned publicly in Paris and Geneva. The political establishment also viewed Rousseau's ideas with suspicion. In The Social Contract, he questioned the legitimacy of monarchy and hereditary rule, arguing instead for popular sovereignty and direct democracy. These ideas threatened the foundations of absolute monarchy and were seen as subversive in an era when political stability depended on centralized power. The combination of his political and religious critiques made Rousseau a target of persecution, forcing him to flee France to avoid arrest. Rousseau sought refuge in his native Geneva, but even there, he encountered hostility. The city-state, which had initially celebrated Rousseau as a distinguished son, turned against him after the publication of The Social Contract and Émile. The works were deemed heretical, and the authorities issued an arrest warrant for Rousseau. Feeling betrayed by his homeland, he renounced his Genevese citizenship, severing one of the last ties to his early life. Over the next several years, Rousseau lived a peripatetic existence, moving from one place to another in search of safety. He found temporary refuge in Switzerland, first in Bern and later in Moutiers, a small village in the Principality of Neuchâtel. During this period, he continued to write, defending his works and responding to critics. However, his stay in Moutiers was short-lived, as local hostility, fueled by religious and political tensions, forced him to flee once again. In 1765, Rousseau accepted an invitation from the philosopher David Hume to move to England. At first, the arrangement seemed promising. Hume admired Rousseau's intellect and sought to provide him with a safe haven. However, the relationship between the two philosophers soon deteriorated, leading to one of the most infamous public feuds in intellectual history. Rousseau, increasingly paranoid and distrustful, accused Hume of conspiring against him. The fallout from this dispute further isolated Rousseau and damaged his reputation in intellectual circles. Rousseau's exile was not only a physical ordeal, but also a profound psychological struggle. He became increasingly paranoid, believing that he was the target of a vast conspiracy orchestrated by his enemies. This sense of persecution colored his later writings, including his autobiographical works. In the Confessions, Rousseau sought to vindicate himself by providing an intimate account of his life, revealing both his personal struggles and his philosophical journey. This work, while celebrated for its literary brilliance, also exposed Rousseau's growing alienation and self-doubt. During his exile, Rousseau's philosophical ideas continued to evolve. His later works, such as Reveries of the Solitary Walker, reflect a shift in focus from social critique to introspection and a search for inner peace. In these writings, Rousseau grappled with themes of nature, solitude, and personal integrity, seeking solace in his connection to the natural world. This turn inward marked a departure from his earlier emphasis on societal reform, signaling a more personal and reflective phase of his intellectual life. Despite the hardships of exile, Rousseau's influence continued to grow. His ideas resonated with those who were disillusioned by the inequalities and injustices of the time. Revolutionary movements in Europe, particularly the French Revolution, drew heavily on Rousseau's writings, using his vision of popular sovereignty and equality as a rallying cry for change. While Rousseau did not live to see the full impact of his ideas, his legacy as a philosopher who challenged the status quo endured. In conclusion, Rousseau's period of exile was a time of profound challenges and transformations. The controversies surrounding the social contract and Émile forced him into a life of constant displacement, shaping both his personal identity and his philosophical outlook. Yet, despite the adversity he faced, Rousseau remained committed to his ideals, producing works that continued to challenge and inspire. This chapter of his life underscores the resilience of his intellectual spirit and his enduring quest for truth and authenticity in the face of overwhelming opposition. As Jean-Jacques Rousseau entered the later stages of his life, he turned inward, producing one of his most enduring and influential works, The Confessions. Written between 1765 and 1770, this autobiographical masterpiece represented a radical departure from conventional self-writing of the time. By baring his soul and recounting his life with unprecedented honesty and introspection, Rousseau not only created a literary classic, but also laid the foundation for the modern autobiography. In The Confessions, Rousseau sought to present himself as a fully human, flawed, and complex individual, offering a unique window into his personal struggles, achievements, and relationships. Rousseau began The Confessions with an ambitious declaration: "I have resolved on an enterprise which has no precedent, and which, once complete, will have no imitator. My purpose is to display to my kind a portrait in every way true to nature, and the man I shall portray will be myself." This statement encapsulated Rousseau's central aim: to reveal his life as authentically as possible, free from the distortions of public perception or societal expectation. By presenting himself true to nature, Rousseau sought to capture the full spectrum of his experiences, emotions, and contradictions. The structure of The Confessions is both chronological and thematic, spanning Rousseau's life from his childhood in Geneva to his years of exile and isolation. The work is marked by vivid descriptions of key events, such as his early education, his romantic relationships, his friendships and rivalries, and the controversies surrounding his philosophical writings. Throughout, Rousseau provides intimate details that illuminate his personality and the emotional undercurrents of his life. His willingness to discuss sensitive topics, including his insecurities, mistakes, and perceived injustices, was groundbreaking for its time. One of the defining features of The Confessions is Rousseau's deep exploration of his emotions and inner world. He delves into his childhood experiences, portraying himself as a sensitive and imaginative boy whose early losses, particularly the death of his mother, left a lasting impression on his psyche. Rousseau's relationship with Madame de Warens, whom he describes as both a maternal figure and a romantic partner, is recounted with a mix of tenderness and complexity. His reflections on these formative experiences reveal his belief in the profound influence of early emotional bonds on human development. Rousseau's honesty in recounting his flaws and misdeeds is another hallmark of the Confessions. He openly admits to moments of selfishness, jealousy, and deceit, including the infamous episode in which he falsely accused a young servant of theft. By exposing his moral failings, Rousseau sought not to justify or excuse them, but to present himself as a fully human being, capable of both virtue and vice. This radical transparency challenged the conventions of autobiography, which had traditionally focused on idealized portrayals of the self. While the Confessions is deeply personal, it also serves as a response to Rousseau's critics and detractors. By narrating his life in his own words, Rousseau sought to counter the misrepresentations and accusations that had plagued him during his years of exile. He framed the work as a form of self-vindication, an opportunity to explain his actions and intentions to posterity. At the same time, Rousseau's tone is often defensive, reflecting his growing sense of persecution and alienation from the intellectual and social circles that once embraced him. Rousseau's decision to foreground his individuality and subjectivity in the Confessions marked a significant departure from traditional Enlightenment ideals. While many Enlightenment thinkers celebrated reason and universal principles, Rousseau emphasized the importance of personal experience and emotion. This focus on the individual as a unique and complex being foreshadowed the Romantic movement, which would embrace similar themes of introspection, authenticity, and the primacy of feeling. Despite its revolutionary approach, the Confessions was not without its controversies. Critics accused Rousseau of self-indulgence and narcissism, pointing to the work's intense focus on his own experiences and grievances. Others questioned the accuracy of Rousseau's account, suggesting that his tendency toward paranoia and self-justification may have distorted his portrayal of events. Nevertheless, the work's literary and philosophical significance was undeniable, offering a new model for understanding the self and its relationship to society. Rousseau's The Confessions also raised important questions about truth and representation in autobiography. By combining factual recollections with emotional and psychological reflections, Rousseau blurred the lines between objective reality and subjective interpretation. This approach challenged readers to consider the ways in which memory, perception, and narrative shape our understanding of the past. In doing so, Rousseau laid the groundwork for later autobiographers who would grapple with similar questions about the nature of self-representation. In conclusion, The Confessions is both a personal and philosophical milestone in Rousseau's life and career. By daring to present himself with honesty and vulnerability, Rousseau redefined the genre of autobiography, creating a work that continues to resonate with readers. The themes of individuality, self-exploration, and emotional authenticity that permeate the Confessions reflect Rousseau's broader philosophical concerns and cement his legacy as a pioneer of modern thought. Through this deeply personal narrative, Rousseau not only illuminated his own life, but also opened the door for others to explore the depths of their own humanity. Jean-Jacques Rousseau's philosophical contributions continue to resonate across centuries, shaping the contours of modern political theory, education, literature, and social thought. His works, characterized by their radical critique of society, individual freedom, and the inherent nature of humanity, left an indelible mark on the intellectual landscape. Though often viewed through a lens of controversy, Rousseau's legacy has grown only more profound with time. His ideas on liberty, equality, the social contract, education, and human nature have influenced not only revolutionary movements but also modern democratic institutions, psychology, and existentialism. Rousseau's vision of liberty, most famously articulated in the social contract, has become one of the foundational principles of democratic thought. His assertion that man is born free and everywhere he is in chains provided a philosophical justification for the overthrow of tyrannical regimes and the establishment of government based on popular sovereignty. This radical proposition, advocating for a government that reflects the collective will of the people, was revolutionary in its challenge to absolute monarchies and feudal structures that dominated Europe in his time. Rousseau's notion of the general will, which calls for the subordination of individual interests to the collective good, was central to his political philosophy and has inspired countless democratic thinkers, including the framers of the American and French revolutions. The French Revolution, in particular, saw Rousseau's ideas manifest in a historical context. Revolutionary leaders like Maximilien Robespierre and others invoked Rousseau's calls for equality and popular sovereignty in their justification for dismantling the monarchy and establishing the republic. While the revolution's trajectory diverged from Rousseau's ideals, his disdain for violence and authoritarianism was at odds with the Reign of Terror. His influence is undeniable. His vision of a society where individual freedom is balanced with collective responsibility laid the groundwork for later debates about the rights of the citizen, the role of the state, and the relationship between liberty and social order. Beyond politics, Rousseau's philosophical exploration of human nature and his critique of civilization have had a lasting influence on psychology and sociology. His theory of the noble savage, which posited that human beings were inherently good in their natural state and that society corrupted them, anticipated later developments in psychological theory, particularly in regard to the formation of the self and the influence of society on identity. Rousseau's reflections on the nature of the child and the corrupting influences of civilization helped shape developmental psychology and educational practices in the modern era. His belief that the self was shaped by both innate tendencies and external forces would resonate in the works of figures such as Sigmund Freud and John Locke. Rousseau's Émile revolutionized educational philosophy by rejecting the rigid, authoritarian models of education that were prevalent in the 18th century. In its place, Rousseau promoted a more personalized, child-centered approach to learning that focused on the individual's natural development and autonomy. The emphasis on experiential learning, moral education, and the cultivation of virtue in Émile laid the groundwork for the progressive education movements that would take root in the 19th and 20th centuries. Educational reformers such as John Dewey, Maria Montessori, and Friedrich Froebel drew heavily on Rousseau's pedagogical ideas, promoting the notion that education should be centered on the child's needs, interests, and potential for self-directed learning. Rousseau's emphasis on the authenticity of the self also influenced the trajectory of modern literature and philosophy. The Confessions, in particular, broke with traditional forms of autobiography by presenting a candid and complex portrait of the author's own life. Rousseau's willingness to expose his vulnerabilities, contradictions, and self-doubts laid the foundation for the modern genre of autobiography, setting the stage for writers like Goethe, Tolstoy, and later existentialist thinkers such as Sartre and Kierkegaard. His focus on personal introspection, emotional depth, and the inner workings of the human psyche resonated with Romanticism, which emphasized individual subjectivity and the complexities of the human condition. Despite the transformative influence of Rousseau's ideas, his legacy has not been without its critics. Some have argued that Rousseau's idealism about human nature and society was overly optimistic or even dangerously naive. His vision of the general will and the supremacy of collective authority has been accused of paving the way for authoritarian regimes that claim to represent the people's will, even as they trample on individual freedoms. Critics have also pointed to the contradictions in Rousseau's work, such as his advocacy for individual freedom alongside his endorsement of a communal society, or his progressive ideas on education alongside his views on the subjugation of women. Rousseau's views on gender, particularly his treatment of women in Émile, have also been the subject of much criticism. His insistence that women's education should prepare them to be subservient to men, and his general belief in the natural inferiority of women, stands in stark contrast to his broader philosophy of equality and personal freedom. Feminist scholars have long criticized Rousseau for perpetuating patriarchal norms, despite his otherwise radical stance on social justice. This inconsistency has led to ongoing debates about how to reconcile Rousseau's revolutionary ideas with his more traditional views on gender. Nevertheless, Rousseau's legacy persists because of the radical nature of his thought and its challenge to the status quo. His work continues to spark debates about the relationship between the individual and society, the role of government, and the nature of freedom. His critique of social inequalities, his rejection of the notion of a fixed human nature, and his insistence on the need for moral and intellectual freedom have had a profound impact on political theory, literature, and philosophy. Rousseau's vision of a world in which individuals are free from the chains of oppression, but also bound by a sense of moral responsibility toward others, remains a powerful and relevant force in contemporary discussions of justice, democracy, and human rights. In conclusion, the intellectual and social legacy of Jean-Jacques Rousseau is vast and multifaceted. His critique of society, his vision of the social contract, his ideas on education and human nature, and his radical approach to autobiography all have enduring relevance in modern thought. Though his works have been interpreted in various ways and often criticized for their contradictions, Rousseau's challenge to the existing norms of his time and his exploration of the tensions between individual freedom and social responsibility continues to inform political and philosophical discourse. As a thinker who rejected the simple answers of his age in favor of complexity, self-examination, and radical change, Rousseau remains a towering figure whose influence reverberates through the centuries. Jean-Jacques Rousseau's life and philosophy marked the closing chapter of the 18th century's intellectual journey and set the stage for the social, political, and cultural upheavals of the following centuries. Despite the personal hardships he faced, including exile, financial struggles, and isolation, Rousseau's work remains a cornerstone of modern philosophy. His challenge to social hierarchies, his exploration of human nature, and his commitment to personal freedom have endured, providing an intellectual framework for revolutions, educational reforms, and the continuing evolution of democratic thought. Rousseau's life concluded in 1778 when he died at the age of 66, but his influence would stretch far beyond his time, continuing to shape the world in the centuries that followed. Rousseau's death marked the end of an era, a pivotal moment in the history of European philosophy. His ideas had already ignited debates that would fuel revolutionary movements, and his critiques of social inequality, the role of the state, and the corruption inherent in civilization resonated with the broader struggles of his age. By the time of his passing, the French Revolution was already in motion, and his ideas were being actively used by revolutionary figures as they sought to dismantle the old order. His death, however, did not dampen the influence of his works. Instead, it cemented his position as one of the most transformative thinkers in Western history. The French Revolution, which began in 1789, drew heavily from Rousseau's political philosophy, particularly his concept of the social contract and his call for popular sovereignty. The revolutionary slogans of liberty, equality, and fraternity echoed Rousseau's ideals, as did the revolutionaries' desire to create a republic founded on the principles of direct democracy. However, Rousseau's writings were also used to justify extreme measures, including the Reign of Terror, where leaders like Robespierre claimed to act on behalf of the general will. This contradictory interpretation of Rousseau's work would haunt his legacy, as his call for the collective good was interpreted by some as an endorsement of authoritarian control, even as he opposed such tyranny in his own life. Rousseau's vision of human freedom, as articulated in the social contract, remains a touchstone for contemporary political discourse. His ideas about the nature of citizenship, the relationship between individuals and the state, and the importance of popular sovereignty have been central to the development of modern democratic theories. His advocacy for direct participation in political life and his belief that legitimate authority must derive from the consent of the governed continue to influence debates about democracy, governance, and political rights. Rousseau's thought challenged the complacency of his era and inspired generations of thinkers, politicians, and activists who sought to redefine the relationship between the state and the individual. Rousseau's influence also extended to the realm of education. His Émile revolutionized ideas about how children should be educated, moving away from rigid, authoritarian methods and advocating for a more natural, child-centered approach. Rousseau's educational philosophy emphasized the importance of moral development alongside intellectual growth and stressed the need to allow children to learn through experience rather than through rote memorization. His ideas laid the groundwork for the progressive educational movements of the 19th and 20th centuries, inspiring educational reformers like John Dewey and Maria Montessori, who adopted many of Rousseau's principles in their own approaches to schooling. The development of psychological and sociological theories in the 19th and 20th centuries also owes a debt to Rousseau. His theories about human nature and the corrupting effects of society had a profound impact on thinkers such as Sigmund Freud and Karl Marx, both of whom engaged with Rousseau's ideas in different ways. Rousseau's belief that civilization distorts human nature found resonance in Freud's psychoanalysis, which posited that repressed instincts and societal norms shaped the human psyche. Similarly, Marx's critique of capitalist society and his focus on class struggle echoed Rousseau's critique of inequality and his vision of a more just and egalitarian society. Despite his central role in shaping modern thought, Rousseau's work was not without its contradictions and flaws. His views on women, for instance, remain a significant point of contention. Rousseau argued in Emile that women's education should focus on their role in supporting men and maintaining domestic harmony, reinforcing the patriarchal norms of his time. This view, at odds with his broader advocacy for equality, has led many feminist scholars to critique Rousseau for perpetuating gender inequality. Nonetheless, even his views on women must be understood within the context of the historical moment in which he lived, and they provide a valuable point of reflection for contemporary readers who continue to wrestle with the challenges of gender equality. Rousseau's complex relationship with the Enlightenment further complicates his legacy. While he shared many of the movement's goals, such as the promotion of reason, progress, and individual freedom, he often criticized the Enlightenment's emphasis on rationalism and its faith in human perfectibility. Rousseau believed that reason, when divorced from emotion and moral conscience, could lead to the corruption of the individual and the collective. His emphasis on the importance of sentiment, intuition, and the connection to nature represented a challenge to the Enlightenment's faith in the power of reason. This tension between rationalism and romanticism has shaped much of the philosophical discourse that followed, influencing movements like Romanticism and existentialism. The enduring relevance of Rousseau's work lies in its ability to speak to the challenges of contemporary society. In a world marked by economic inequality, political instability, and environmental degradation, Rousseau's critique of modern civilization, his advocacy for social justice, and his calls for a more authentic and humane form of living remain as pertinent as ever. His reflections on the tension between individual freedom and social responsibility continue to shape debates about the balance between personal rights and collective well-being. Rousseau's insistence that true liberty can only be realized through the creation of a just and equitable society challenges modern thinkers to confront the structural inequalities that persist in the world today. In conclusion, Jean-Jacques Rousseau's life and work represent a profound and transformative moment in the intellectual history of the Western world. His critiques of civilization, his radical political ideas, and his exploration of human nature paved the way for significant social and political change, influencing revolutionary movements and shaping modern democratic ideals. His legacy, while contested and complex, continues to inform contemporary debates in philosophy, education, politics, and psychology. Through his writings, Rousseau challenged us to confront the limitations of society and the potential for human flourishing, urging future generations to seek a world in which individuals are free to live in harmony with their natural selves and with one another. The end of Rousseau's life marked the end of an era, but his ideas continue to shape the world, ensuring that his influence will endure for generations to come.